The highway south of Atlanta does not announce itself. It does not have the skyline, the stacked billboards, the wall of horns. It simply opens up, quietly, into something older and slower. And if you have been living in the noise long enough, that opening feels like a hand pressed flat against your chest, telling you to breathe. Highway 41 on an August morning in Georgia is its own particular kind of beautiful. The kind that does not ask to be noticed. The sun comes up low and amber over the pine stands. The roadside kudzu still holds the dew. The air through a cracked window carries that last cool edge of summer that the afternoon heat will burn away without mercy. Darius Whitfield drove with both hands on the wheel of a rented white Ford Fusion. Nothing flashy, nothing that announced anything, which was entirely the point. He watched the mile markers tick by with the patience of a man who had spent 11 months in rooms where patience was the only currency that actually moved anything. He was 44 years old, and for the first time in his professional life, his name meant something that people outside federal buildings would eventually come to recognize. 3 days ago, the United States Senate had confirmed him as director of the FBI Civil Rights Task Force Southeast Region, a position that had taken 6 rounds of congressional testimony, 2 background checks that went back to his college roommates, and 11 months of waiting. During those 11 months, Darius had learned something important. The most powerful thing in Washington is not ambition, it is stillness. The ability to sit in a room full of people testing you and simply not flinch. His face had appeared on C-SPAN during the confirmation vote for exactly 9 seconds. A camera panning the gallery, catching him in the third row, hands folded, expression unreadable. Those 9 seconds represented the full extent of his public profile outside the Capitol. Nobody in rural Georgia would recognize him stepping out of a white rental car on a Tuesday morning. That was not an accident. Sitting in the passenger seat, feet up on the dash in a way that would have made their mother furious, was Marcus Whitfield. 36 years old, history teacher at an Atlanta middle school, youth basketball coach, and the only person on earth who had ever successfully talked Darius out of taking himself too seriously. Marcus had driven up from Atlanta the night before, not because anything required it, not because there was an agenda or a schedule. He had called his brother 2 weeks earlier and said simply, "I want one more morning with you before you disappear into that title." Darius, who almost never said yes to anything not on a calendar, had said yes. Their mother's house was 90 miles behind them. They had eaten her cooking, slept in rooms smelling faintly of cedar sachets, and said goodbye in the driveway at 6 in the morning while she stood in her robe and reminded Darius to eat something real before he got to Atlanta. The FBI regional field office was 2 hours ahead. Right now, the only things between them were a gospel station Marcus had loudly enforced on the radio, and a running argument about who had gotten the better end of their father's watch when he passed. "You got the Seiko," Marcus said. Not for the first time. The Seiko was the good one, Darius said. The Seiko was the everyday one. "I got the dress watch. And you have worn that Seiko to 3 Senate confirmation hearings and multiple congressional briefings, which means you have already gotten more use out of it than Dad got in 20 years. That is called efficiency. That is called taking the better watch and making up a reason afterward." Darius laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts deep in the chest and loosens something in your shoulders and makes your eyes water. He had not laughed like that in a long time. The surprise of it made him laugh a little more, and Marcus looked over at him with the particular expression of a man who had been waiting for that sound. Confirmation hearings do not leave much room for laughter. The windows were cracked. The air smelled like pine resin and cut grass from the fields rolling past on both sides. The gospel station was doing something with a Hammond organ that made Marcus nod along and drum on the dashboard. For about 40 minutes, it was the simplest morning Darius had experienced in almost a year. Then Marcus picked up his phone. He was looking for breakfast, somewhere off the highway, somewhere with actual food, the kind that required someone to have made real decisions about seasoning. Earl's Roadside, he said, scrolling through the listing. 4.2 stars. A photo of biscuits that looked genuinely enormous. 3 separate reviews described something called the country breakfast plate as the real deal. 12 minutes off the highway, Tillman, Georgia. Darius glanced in the rearview mirror. His security detail was back there. 6 black Chevrolet Suburbans carrying 14 FBI agents rolling in standard two-vehicle formation roughly a mile and a half behind. Except they were not, because Darius had called Special Agent in Charge Renata Cross the night before and asked her to hang back. He had told her he wanted one ordinary morning. No earpieces, no formation, no agents positioned at diner exits. Just 2 brothers getting breakfast the way they used to before either of them had anything to protect. Cross had been quiet on the phone for a moment. The silence of a professional woman computing risk against a very specific kind of stubbornness. She had agreed. 20 minutes, she said. They would follow 20 minutes behind, no closer. If he did not check in by 9:15, they were coming in regardless. 20 minutes, Darius told Marcus. Marcus looked up from his phone. "Remember that number," Darius said, and he turned off toward Tillman. The town of Tillman, Georgia, had a population of roughly 3,200 people. It had the quality of a place that had been the same for a very long time and had developed over those years a settled confidence in its own sameness. The kind of town where the hardware store has been in the same family for 3 generations, where everybody knows everybody's truck by sound before they see it, where a stranger pulling into the gravel lot of Earl's roadside at 7:50 in the morning on a Tuesday would be noticed, not with hostility necessarily, but noticed. Earl's roadside sat where Highway 41 met a county road with no name on the signs, a low building with a metal roof, red-checked curtains in the windows, a hand-painted specials board visible from the road, a screen door that groaned on its spring every single time it opened, which Earl Briggs had been meaning to fix for approximately 6 years and had not. Darius parked the Fusion near the entrance. They stepped out and the gravel crunched under their shoes. 2 men on the sidewalk across the street stopped their conversation and watched. Not with anything you could point to, just watched. The way you watch something that breaks the familiar pattern of a known view. 2 black men stepping out of a white rental car in Tillman, Georgia at 7:50 on a Tuesday morning. People noticed. Inside, the morning was doing what it had done for decades. The ceiling fan turned slowly on its low setting. The Formica counter ran the full length of the back wall. The vinyl on the booth seats had been repaired in places with tape that had long since stopped matching the original color, and the smell of the place hit them before the screen door even fully closed behind them. Bacon fat, black coffee, and something sweet rising from the kitchen. The biscuits, Darius realized. The cowbell above the door clanged. A few heads turned. Truckers at the counter. 3 of them, all in their 50s or 60s, looked up, and then back at their plates. An older couple in the corner booth did not look up at all. A woman near the register was refilling ketchup bottles and kept doing exactly that. The looks were not hostile, just long, the particular length of attention that comes from a room where 2 black men ordering breakfast before 8 in the morning do not fit neatly into what the morning is expected to contain. Earl Briggs came out from behind the counter. 70 or so, moving with the careful economy of a man whose knees had developed opinions about mornings. Apron over a chambray shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, carrying a coffee pot the way men carry things they have carried 10,000 times before. "Morning, gentlemen. Booth or counter?" Booth, Marcus said. Earl led them to the window booth, the one with the best view of the parking lot and the highway beyond it, and set down 2 menus and 2 mugs and poured coffee without asking. "What can I get you started with?" He said it the way a man says something he has said 10,000 times. Automatic, friendly, not unkind. Darius ordered the country breakfast. Marcus ordered the same and asked Earl to keep the coffee coming. Earl nodded and went back to the kitchen. For about 12 minutes, the morning at Earl's roadside was exactly what Darius had asked for. Marcus was telling a story about one of his 8th graders who had submitted a history essay on the causes of World War II and had with genuine confidence listed the Cold War as the primary cause, and had defended this position when challenged. Darius was laughing so hard he had to set down his fork and press one hand against his sternum. Marcus was laughing at his own story, which he always did, which always made Darius laugh harder. The biscuits were in fact excellent. The coffee was strong and consistent. The ceiling fan moved the warm air around in a way that was almost comfortable. And then the cowbell above the door clanged again. And the particular quality of the morning changed. The way weather changes, not all at once, but in the pressure. in something you register before you can name it. Deputy Warren Holt walked into Earl's roadside the way a man walks into a room he has walked into every day for 20 years and has long since stopped seeing it as anything other than an extension of himself. With the easy territorial confidence of someone who has never had to calculate whether he belonged. He was 6'2", mid-50s, a gut that pressed against his duty belt and a posture that said he did not care what you thought about it. Sunglasses pushed up on his forehead, a jaw that rested in a permanent mild clench as though he were perpetually in the middle of deciding something about someone. His holster was unsnapped, a habit, not a decision. The kind of thing that happens when a man has been wearing a gun for so long that the gun becomes part of his resting posture. The 3 truckers at the counter nodded at him, not the nod of strangers to an officer, the nod of people who see a familiar face and are comfortable with what that face represents. Earl behind the counter had a mug poured and set out before Holt reached the stool. This was Holt's diner in the same way Tillman was Holt's town, and the morning was Holt's morning. Not formally, not on paper, but in the texture of the place, in the way people deferred to his presence and the way his presence moved through the room without friction. Cody Raines came in behind him, 25 years old, 8 months into his posting with the Callaway County Sheriff's Office, still in the phase of the job where the weight of the badge on his chest felt like something that could go either way, either the weight of responsibility or the weight of permission, and still hoping quietly that he was the kind of officer who would figure out the difference before it was too late. Holt picked up his mug, took a slow sip, and let his eyes drift toward the window booth. He stared at Marcus and Darius the way a man stares at something in his yard that was not there when he went to sleep. Not with immediate aggression, but with the sharpened attention of someone for whom the unfamiliar is, by definition, a problem to be solved. He set the mug down. He leaned toward Raines, keeping his eyes on the booth, and said something low enough that no one at the counter could hear. Raines glanced at the booth, then looked away. A small, deliberate look away. The kind that means you saw what you were told to see and you are not comfortable with what comes next. But you do not know yet what to do about that. "You know what the issue with this county is," Cody Holt said, still watching the booth. "No baseline maintenance. You let the standards slip, and then one morning you have got people pulling off 41 like they own the road." Raines shifted on his stool. "Those 2 men are eating breakfast," he said carefully. "That is what they want you to see. That is what they are actually doing, though." Holt finally looked at Raines. The look was not unkind exactly, but it carried the weight of a man communicating to a younger man that he has a great deal to learn. "Rental car," Holt said. "No luggage visible through the windows. I looked when I came in. Stopping in Tillman at 8 in the morning. 2 men, neither one from around here. You tell me what that reads as." "It reads as 2 people getting breakfast." Holt picked up his coffee mug and stood. "Watch how it is done," he said, and he walked toward the window booth. Raines stayed at the counter. He turned his mug in his hands and watched his training officer's back, and felt the specific discomfort of a man who knows the right thing to do and does not yet have the standing to do it. Holt approached the window booth without introducing himself, without offering a badge number, without saying good morning, without any of the formalities the job technically required. He simply stopped at the edge of the table and stood there close enough that his duty belt was at Darius's eye level, and looked down at the 2 men the way he looked at things he was deciding about. "You boys passing through," he said. "Or did somebody tell you about this place?" The word boys came out the way it always came out from men like Warren Holt. Not shouted, not emphasized, just dropped flat into the air. The way you drop something heavy onto a surface to make a point about the weight. Darius set his fork down. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth and set the napkin back on his knee. And in those 4 seconds, he made a complete internal assessment of everything that was happening. The approach without introduction. The lack of badge number. The deliberate proximity. The word that had been chosen. He cataloged it with the precise, organized attention of a man who had spent 20 years in federal law enforcement studying exactly this kind of encounter from every possible angle. And beneath the assessment, he felt something else. The particular exhaustion of a black man in America who has done this calculation so many times that it has become involuntary. A toll you pay just by being present. "Just passing through," he said. His voice was calm even and gave Warren Holt nothing to work with. "We stopped to have breakfast." Holt repeated the words slowly, like they tasted like something he did not believe. "Passing through? From where? To where? Is that relevant to anything, officer?" Holt tilted his head. The diner had gone quiet. Not silent exactly, but the comfortable murmur of a Tuesday morning had become something more careful, more attentive. You could feel it in the way the trucker nearest the counter had stopped moving his fork. "I will determine what is relevant," Holt said. "I am asking you a question." Marcus looked up from his plate, looked at Holt directly without flinching. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Holt did not look at Marcus. He kept his eyes on Darius, the one who had pushed back, the one whose voice carried that particular steadiness Holt recognized as a specific kind of challenge to his authority. "We have had a string of break-ins in Callaway County," Holt said, settling into the practiced cadence of a pretext he had used so many times it no longer required thought. 3 in the last month. So when I see faces I do not recognize, I like to have conversations. It is called community policing. Here is what you need to understand about that moment. There were no break-ins. Not 3. Not 1. Not any. The Callaway County dispatch logs for the entire month of August would later be subpoenaed and entered into evidence in a federal proceeding. Those logs showed 0 burglaries reported, 0 investigations opened, 0 arrests made. Warren Holt had manufactured that pretext on the spot, a lie he had used in various forms on various mornings in various diners and parking lots across Callaway County on various Black and Latino faces passing through his town for more than 2 decades. It had always worked before, because the people he used it on could not prove standing in a diner booth with their hands visible that the break-ins did not exist. Darius knew that. He did what black men in America have been doing their entire lives. He kept his voice below the line that gives a man like Holt an excuse. He stayed calm. He chose his words the way you choose your footing on unstable ground. "We are eating breakfast, officer. That is all we are doing." Something moved behind Holt's eyes. A tightening. A flash. The expression of a man not accustomed to being met with this caliber of composure by someone he has decided does not belong in his diner. He leaned in and placed one palm flat on the table. His wedding ring made a small hard sound against the formica. "This is a family establishment," he said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "We like to keep things comfortable for the regulars." "You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand what you are implying," Darius said quietly. "And I would like to finish my breakfast." That was the moment. That was when something changed in Warren Holt's face that had nothing to do with law enforcement. A black man had looked him in the eye in his own diner, in his own town, and told him with perfect calm that he saw exactly what was happening, and was not afraid of it. Holt straightened up. He hooked both thumbs into his duty belt. "Wrap it up," he said. 5 minutes, and then I want you gone." Marcus's hand tightened on his fork. Under the table, 2 of Darius's fingers pressed gently against his brother's forearm, a small specific pressure, the signal their father had taught them. The one that meant not now, not this way, I have this. Marcus's jaw clenched until you could see the muscle working beneath his skin. But he did not speak. Holt came back in 3 minutes. He did not sit at his usual stool. He did not pick up his coffee. He came back because the situation had not resolved to his satisfaction. Because Darius and Marcus were still in the window booth, still at their plates, still eating with the unhurried steadiness of 2 men who had decided they were not going to be hurried. And that unhurriedness was to Warren Holt the most provocative thing in the room. Cody Raines had positioned himself near the front door, not blocking it exactly, but standing there with one hand resting on his belt in the particular spot that communicated you leave when we say you leave. The diner had shifted. An older woman, 3 booths over, quietly gathered her purse, put some bills on the table, and walked out without finishing her meal. She did not look at anyone as she left. The cowbell rang behind her and then went quiet. Loretta, the morning waitress, was behind the counter gripping a dish towel with both hands, wringing it over and over, watching with a pressed thin line of a mouth, occasionally glancing at the phone on the wall. She did not pick it up. Nobody spoke. Nobody was going to speak. Holt was back at the edge of the window booth. "Notepad out now." Pen clicking. "I am going to need to see identification," he said. "Both of you." Darius looked up at him steadily. "Are we being detained?" I'm conducting a routine inquiry. On what specific grounds? Holt's pen stopped clicking. I told you, break-ins in the area, unfamiliar vehicles, unfamiliar faces. That is my grounds. With respect, Officer Darius said, and his voice carried the precise weight of a man who has spent 20 years in federal courtrooms and knows exactly what respect sounds like and what it does not. That description does not constitute probable cause. We are under no legal obligation to identify ourselves while we are lawfully present on private property, unless we are being formally detained for a specific and articulated crime. The temperature in the diner dropped, not literally, but in the quality of attention in the room, in the held-breath stillness of the truckers at the counter, in the older couple in the corner booth who had stopped pretending to look at their menus. Holt stared at Darius for a long 5 seconds. Then he smiled, not a warm smile. The smile of a man who has decided he is going to enjoy the next part of this. The smile that comes from the specific confidence of someone who has never in 24 years run out of moves. "All right then," he said. He stepped back and keyed his radio. The static crackle cut through the silence like a blade. "Dispatch, this is Holt. I need a registration check on a vehicle in the Earl's roadside lot. White Ford Fusion, Georgia rental plates." And then he read the plate number out loud, slowly, one character at a time, loud enough for every person in the building to hear every digit. He did this deliberately, and everyone in the diner understood why. The message was clear: this is what happens in my town when you do not do what I tell you. Raines moved from the door to the window. He cupped his hands against the glass and peered out at the Fusion. "Rental plates," he said over his shoulder. Holt raised an eyebrow. "Rental," he repeated, turning back to Darius. "Interesting. Who rents a car to drive through Tillman, Georgia at 8 in the morning? What are you two really doing here?" "Getting breakfast," Marcus said flatly, which is getting cold, by the way. Holt ignored him completely, like Marcus was not even in the room. He kept his eyes on Darius. And after another long silence, he told them one more time, quiet and direct. "Show him the IDs." Darius looked at him for a long moment. He made the calculation that every black man in America makes in moments like this. How much do I push? How much do I give? What does each choice cost me? He reached into his back pocket and slid his driver's license across the table. Marcus hesitated, then did the same. Holt picked them up between 2 fingers and held them to the light. Looked at Darius's, looked at Marcus's, looked between them. "Brothers." "Yes. And where were you before this?" "Our mother's house." Holt wrote something in his notepad. Took his time, clicked the pen twice, then looked up with the same cold smile. "Step outside, both of you." The parking lot of Earl's roadside was white gravel and open sky and no shade of any kind. The August Georgia heat had already reached 91 degrees, the kind of heat that settles on the back of your neck and stays there. Holt pointed at the hood of his cruiser. "Hands flat, both of you." Darius did not move immediately. "Officer, I want to be completely clear. We have committed no crime. We were eating breakfast. And now you are cooperating with a law enforcement officer. Hands on the hood." Darius looked at Marcus. He gave him the nod, the one their father had given them before difficult things. Chin down, eyes steady, the one that meant do what you have to do, but do not lose yourself in it. They walked to the cruiser and placed their palms flat on the hood. The metal was already baking under the Georgia sun, not uncomfortably warm. Genuinely hot. The kind of heat that goes from tolerable to painful in about 90 seconds. Darius felt it searing into his palms. He kept his hands exactly where they were. He kept his breathing even. Holt stepped behind Darius first. The search was not a pat-down. It was a demonstration. Rough and deliberate. Hands pressing hard into his rib cage, running down both legs, squeezing every pocket. Not searching for something specifically. Performing something. The ritual assertion of physical dominance over a man who had refused to be dominated any other way. He pulled out Darius's phone, looked at it, set it on the hood, pulled out his wallet, flipped through it even though he had already seen the license. Then he moved to Marcus, slower this time, making a show of it. Through the diner window, the faces were still there. Earl with both hands flat on the counter. The trucker in the John Deere cap. The older couple who had stood up without apparently realizing they were standing. all of them watching two black men with their palms flat on a hot cruiser hood, being searched in bright morning sun in front of an audience that could not find its voice. If you had been sitting in that diner that morning watching through that window 3 feet from what was happening, what would you have done? That question is not rhetorical. It is the question that the next 12 months of Tillman, Georgia, would be forced to answer. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I think about it too. Holt stepped back and nodded at Raines. Check the vehicle. Raines walked to the Fusion and opened the driver's door without asking. Darius turned his head. I do not consent to this search. Noted, Holt said, without looking at him. The word landing like a door being closed. Raines opened the glove box. Rental agreement. Registration. Nothing. He moved to the back seat, looked under the mats, ran his hands between the cushions. Found nothing, because there was nothing to find. He moved to the trunk. Inside a single leather briefcase, black professional, the kind that costs more than Raines's weekly paycheck. A garment bag containing a pressed dark suit. A small cardboard box of business cards. Raines brought the briefcase to Holt like a retriever bringing something to its owner. Holt unlatched it. Inside legal briefs, printed memos on thick bond paper folders, and a leather portfolio with something embossed on the cover. The briefs had headers. Thick, official, unmistakable. United States Department of Justice across the top. Federal Bureau of Investigation below that. The portfolio had the FBI seal pressed into the leather in gold. And there was a stack of business cards in a silver holder. Holt flipped through the papers the way a bored man flips through a magazine he has no intention of reading. Careless, fast, not seeing what was right in front of him, because he had already decided what he was looking at before he opened the case. He held up one of the folders. What are you, some kind of legal consultant? One of those YouTube lawyers. He picked up one of the business cards and read the name out loud. Darius Whitfield. He flicked the card into the gravel. It spun in the air and landed face down in the dust. Must be real important. Got yourself cards and everything. He did not read the line below the name. He tossed the folder back into the briefcase and let the case drop. It hit the gravel and the latch gave and papers spilled out. The FBI seal on the portfolio cover caught the morning sun for a moment. Gold on black, before a loose page settled over it face down in the dust. Then Holt crouched close to Darius. Close enough that Darius could hear the leather of his duty belt creaking. 24 years, Holt said, his voice low, almost conversational. 24 years I have kept this county what it is. And it is always, always the same story with you people. You show up where you do not belong. You cause a problem. And then you stand there crying about your rights like you earned the right to cry about anything. He paused. Boy, just that. Dropped flat and low. The way men like Warren Holt have said that word for 100 years in towns like Tillman. Not loud, not dramatic, just placed there. The way you place a boot on something to remind it of its position. Marcus broke, not physically. He did not move his hands from the hood. He did not turn his body. But his voice cracked open like something that had been held closed for too long. We were eating breakfast, he said. His voice was shaking. Not from fear. From years. That is all we were doing. Just eating breakfast. You cannot do this to people. Holt pushed off the cruiser and walked toward Marcus with slow, deliberate steps. Got close. Too close. Finger pointed at Marcus's face. One more word. One, and you are in cuffs. Resisting obstruction disorderly conduct. I will pick the one that fits best, and I've got all day to decide. Marcus's hands were trembling against the hood, not from fear, from years. Years of being followed in stores. Years of being pulled over for the crime of driving a car that looked too good for the neighborhood he was driving through. Years of watching his brother work harder and longer and smarter than every other person in every room and still be the one who had to prove he belonged in it. Years of swallowing things that had no business being swallowed. And this was the morning when 24 years of Warren Holt's entitlement collided with 36 years of Marcus Whitfield's accumulated weight. What came out was a voice cracking open over a gravel parking lot in Tillman, Georgia, while someone pressed a phone against their thigh and let it record. Because Marcus had been recording since the moment they walked out of the diner. The angle was unsteady at first. The phone pressed against his leg inside his pocket. But the audio was clear. and after they reached the cruiser, he had angled his body so the lens faced outward. Everything was captured. The search, the briefcase, the cards flicked into the dirt, the crouching close, the word that got dropped flat like a boot. All of it, 41 minutes of it, and still running. Rains came back from the cruiser computer. Both clean, he said, flat without inflection. No warrants, no priors, nothing in any system. Holt did not react, did not step back, did not release them, did not offer any of the things a man offers when an investigation he invented comes back completely empty. He just took a sip of his coffee and stared at the rental car with the expression of a man for whom an inconvenient result is a personal affront. "Something about this still does not sit right with me," he said quietly. He looked at Darius. Darius held the stare, and something settled behind Darius's eyes in that moment. Something that had the quality of a door being locked from the inside. The expression of a man who has now seen and documented and recorded everything he needs to see, and who understands that what happens next is going to be very different from what Warren Holt expects. Deputy Darius said, his voice calm, below any threshold of aggression. The voice of a man making a factual announcement. "Everything that is taking place in this parking lot right now, every word and every action and every decision is going to be reviewed by people with considerably more authority than either of us." He paused. "That is not a threat. That is a statement of fact." Holt looked at him, then laughed, short, dismissive. "Run them both again," he told Rains. "Take your time." Rains walked back to the cruiser, and Darius heard the sound before he saw anything. It was low, deep, synchronized. The kind of sound that does not come from one engine. That cannot come from one engine. Multiple engines running in tight coordination, moving together through a county road at the same speed in the same direction. Like something that has done this 10,000 times before and knows exactly what it is doing, and does not need to hurry. Holt heard it at the same moment Darius did. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. Rains in the cruiser went completely still at the computer. The sound built. Not fast, not dramatic, just steadily louder. The way a train builds when it is coming from the right direction and you are standing close to the track. Then the first one came around the curve where the county road met Highway 41 and turned into the straight approach to Earl's roadside, a black Chevrolet Suburban, tinted windows so dark they looked like they had been painted shut. 2 government antennas on the roof, federal plates front and rear, moving slowly, not cautiously, not hesitantly, with the deliberate, unhurried pace of something that does not need to announce itself because its presence is announcement enough. Then the second Suburban came around the curve behind the first, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth and sixth together, rolling in tight 2x2 formation filling the county road behind them. And the convoy turned as one body into the gravel lot of Earl's roadside in Tillman, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning in August, and nobody in that parking lot said a single word. The first Suburban pulled directly behind Holt's cruiser and stopped, blocking it in completely, not aggressively, just thoroughly. The way a door being closed is not aggressive, but is nonetheless final. The remaining 5 vehicles spread across the gravel lot in a pattern that was clearly practiced and purposeful, each one covering an exit, anchoring a corner of the space, until the lot was covered the way a net covers water. Completely, without gaps. All 6 engines cut at the same moment. The silence that followed was louder than the rumble that had come before it. Holt's hand moved toward his belt, stopped, his eyes jumping left and right and back, trying to count vehicles, trying to understand what 14 agents worth of federal law enforcement were doing in the parking lot of a roadside diner in a county with 3,200 people. Rains had gotten out of the cruiser and was now standing against it, back flat, face the color of old milk. His hand hovered over his radio without pressing anything, because he did not know who to call, and he did not know whether calling would help or make everything that was clearly about to happen considerably worse. "What the hell is this Holt said?" It came out thin and hollow. The authority that usually lived in his voice had evacuated, leaving something that sounded like a man who has just realized he is standing in the middle of something much larger than himself. 14 doors opened. The sound of it. 14 handles. 14 hinges. 14 pairs of boots hitting gravel in near-synchronized rhythm. It was something that Holt and Raines would each separately describe in their subsequent depositions and conversations for the rest of their lives as the moment when they understood completely and without remaining uncertainty that the morning was over. In every sense of the word, out of the Suburban stepped 14 FBI agents, some in tactical vests with yellow letters across the chest, some in dark suits with the coiled wire of earpieces disappearing behind their ears, all of them armed. All of them moving with the particular calm that belongs to people who walk into situations worse than this before their first cup of coffee, and find the coffee afterward, and drink it without shaking. They fanned across the gravel lot without a spoken word between them. 2 agents moved to position directly behind Holt. 1 stepped alongside Raines. 2 flanked the cruiser. The rest established a loose perimeter around the diner entrance and the exits. None of it was dramatic. None of it involved raised voices or drawn weapons. It was simply the careful and thorough deployment of trained people who knew exactly where they needed to be, and went there. Leading them was a woman, black, early 40s, hair pulled back in a tight coil, badge clipped at her hip, moving across the gravel with a stride that had already catalogued and dismissed every threat in the lot before her second boot touched down. And she walked past Warren Holt like he was a fence post, did not look at him, did not acknowledge his badge or his uniform or his 24 years or his coffee mug or his existence, walked directly without breaking stride to the hood of his cruiser, where Darius Whitfield was still standing with his palms flat and Georgia dust on his collar and the skin of his hands going red from 20 minutes against baking metal. Special Agent in Charge Renata Cross. FBI Atlanta Field Office. Mr. Whitfield, she said, her voice measured, direct, the voice of a professional in full operational mode. We lost your signal after the highway interchange. Are you all right, sir? Sir, that word, in a gravel parking lot in Tillman, Georgia, with Warren Holt standing 8 feet away. Sir, it hit the air the way a stone hits still water, without violence, without drama, just dropped. And then the ring spread outward in every direction and kept spreading. And the silence it created in the moment after it landed was the most significant silence of the entire morning. Holt's mouth fell open, not metaphorically, an actual physical giving way of the jaw, the hinge of it going slack, as if something structural in the architecture of his face had abruptly failed. Darius pushed himself off the hood. He rolled his shoulders. The slow, deliberate roll of a man reasserting possession of his own body. He flexed his fingers and looked at the skin of his palms, which was bright red and faintly raised from the heat. He gave Renata Cross one small nod. I am fine, Agent Cross. These deputies were just checking on us. The way he said it, the particular tone of it, calm and almost gentle, like a man offering someone one final opportunity to understand how badly they have miscalculated. Cross turned around. For the first time, she looked at Warren Holt, the way a surgeon looks at a scan that has already confirmed the diagnosis. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, not with pity. With the detached clinical focus of someone who knows exactly what she is looking at and knows exactly what the next steps are and is going to execute them without drama. She removed her badge from her hip and held it at Holt's eye level. Steady, close enough to read every engraved letter. Held it there for 3 full seconds. Special Agent in Charge, Renata Cross, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Atlanta Field Office. She let a beat pass. You are currently detaining Darius Whitfield, Director of the FBI Civil Rights Task Force Southeast Region. She let that sentence sit in the air between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Did not follow it with anything. Did not need to. Just let it do its work. And the work it did was this. It took everything Warren Holt had built his life on. The 24 years, the authority, the certainty, the absolute confidence that he was the most powerful person in any room he chose to walk into in Callaway County. And it reduced all of it in the span of about 4 seconds to dust. Holt's mouth opened and closed. His eyes went from Cross to Darius to the 14 agents positioned around the lot to Cross again. The eyes of a man running out of room in every direction simultaneously. His boot caught the gravel when he stepped back. He stumbled half a step. The man who had pressed 2 grown men onto the hood of his cruiser in 91-degree heat and called them boy 5 minutes ago just tripped over his own feet trying to get distance from a woman half his age. A woman who was looking at him like he was a specimen. Inside the diner, every face was pressed against the glass. Earl Briggs had both hands flat on the counter. The trucker in the John Deere cab had his phone raised to the window, recording through the glass. The two women who had been in the corner booth were standing without apparently having decided to stand, watching the parking lot with the expression of people who are watching something they will describe for the rest of their lives. Darius walked, slowly, without haste, without any gesture, toward the audience of 14 federal agents and the diner full of watching faces. He walked to the spot in the gravel where Holt had dropped his briefcase, where his papers had spilled, where the Department of Justice letterhead was lying face down in the dust, where the FBI portfolio was half open beside it. He got down on one knee, and he gathered his papers, one by one, the memos, the legal briefs, the folders, the business cards that had been flicked into the dirt. He picked them up individually and stacked them with the same attention he gave to everything. The same precision, the same quiet, deliberate care of a man who is making a point without making a speech. He placed them back into the briefcase, closed the latch. The latch clicked softly, a small sound, a private sound, and then Darius stood up and squared his shoulders and turned around and became fully and without apology the person he actually was. "Deputy Holt," he said. His voice carried across the lot with the natural authority of a man who has spent 20 years making people listen to him in rooms where they did not want to. "Your full name and badge number, please." Holt's voice came out scraped and hollow. "Warren Holt, badge 417. Deputy Holt. Was the search of our vehicle conducted with a warrant?" Silence, just the sound of gravel settling and the distant hum of traffic on Highway 41. "Did you have documented probable cause to detain us?" Silence. "The break-ins you cited this morning, the 3 in Callaway County, are those filed incidents? Will I find them in your dispatch records when my office pulls them this afternoon?" Holt's eyes went to the gravel. His lips moved. The way lips move when the words that have always been available to them, the authority and the threats and the commands and the fabrications, are simply no longer there. No longer usable. No longer anything at all. Darius nodded slowly, the nod of a man who already knew every answer before he asked every question. "That is what I thought." He turned to his brother. Marcus was standing very still by the cruiser, not leaning, not moving, with tears running down his face, and they were not sad tears, and they were not scared tears. They were the kind that have no clean name, the kind that come when something you have carried in your chest your whole life, something that was given to you before you were old enough to understand what it was or why you had to carry it, is finally for once in the light, seen by people who have the standing to do something about it, and the release of being seen is so unfamiliar that the body does not know what to do with it except this. "Show them," Darius said quietly. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up with the screen facing outward. 41 minutes of recording. Still running. The timer clicking in the corner of the screen. On that recording was everything. The approach at the booth without introduction. The manufactured break-ins pretext. The ID demand. The radio humiliation. The forced march to the parking lot. The hands on the burning hood. The search without consent. The briefcase opened and its contents treated like evidence of fraud. The business card flicked into the dirt. The crouching close. The sermon about keeping the county what it is. The word that was dropped flat like a boot. All of it. Full audio. Nothing missing. Nothing cut. Cross looked at the phone. She turned to 2 of her agents. "Secure his body camera. Memory card pulled and logged before we leave this lot." One agent moved to Holt. "Your body camera, deputy." Holt's hand fumbled at his chest. He unclipped the camera and placed it in the agent's hand with the specific movements of a man who no longer has the option of choosing what he gives. "Your service weapon and your badge," Cross said. "Standard protocol pending federal review of this incident." Holt stared at her. For a moment, something moved in his face that might have been the beginning of argument. The reflex of 24 years of being the person in the room who decided what protocol meant. Then he looked at the 14 federal agents in the lot around him, and he unholstered his weapon and placed it on the hood of his own cruiser, the same hood he had forced 2 men onto 20 minutes before. Then he unpinned his badge and held it in his palm. He looked at it. The way a man looks at a photograph of someone who has just died. He placed it next to the gun. Raines raised both hands slightly. I was just following his lead. I did not. I was not the one who... You participated in an unlawful detention, Cross said without looking at him. You conducted a warrantless search of a federal official's vehicle. You will be named in the report. A supervisor will be in contact with you today. Raines's mouth closed. He looked at Holt for something. Guidance. Solidarity. Anything. Holt did not look back. Because Holt was staring at the ground with the expression of a man who has just watched his entire world fall through a crack in the earth and is only now beginning to process that the falling is not going to stop. Both deputies were separated. Holt placed in the back of one Suburban, Raines in another. Not under arrest. Not yet, but removed. Contained, stripped of authority, and surrounded by people whose authority made theirs look like something a child had drawn. Then Darius walked back to Warren Holt. He stopped in front of him. Not aggressive. Not close enough to threaten. Just close enough that Holt had nowhere to look except straight into his eyes. You told me, Darius said. Still calm. Still even. The voice of a man giving testimony. You told me that if you had known who I was, this would not have happened. I need you to understand something very specific about what that means. He paused. That is not a defense deputy. That is a confession. Because what it tells me, and what it will tell the federal investigators who review this case, is that the only thing standing between a black man in Callaway County and what you just put us through is a title. And most people do not carry one to breakfast. Holt's face was gray, not flushed, not red, gray. The color a man turns when the ground he has been standing on has been gone for some time and he is only just now looking down. Save the apologies for the investigation, Darius said. He turned away and did not look back. Earl Briggs was standing outside the diner door when it was over. He had come out quietly, trembling, hands clasped together in front of him like a man in church who has been sitting in the wrong pew and finally understands which pew that is. Mr. Whitfield, his voice thin and unsteady. I'm sorry. I watched the whole thing through the window, and I did not pick up the phone. I should have said something the moment he walked up to your table. I did not, and I am sorry for that. Darius looked at him, not with anger, not with the particular distance that justified anger might create, with something more complicated than either. The expression of a man who has lived long enough to know that bystanders who keep their silence are not monsters. They are people, and what you do with them afterward matters. There is going to be a full federal investigation, Mr. Briggs, he said. You can still do the right thing. Tell the truth about what you witnessed this morning. All of it. Earl nodded. Small, fast nods. The nods of a man convincing himself as much as agreeing. I have got cameras, he said, inside and outside, 4 angles, going back 72 hours. I will hand over everything. You will not even need a subpoena. I will have it ready today. That would help, Darius said. Earl went back inside. Marcus uploaded the 41-minute recording to his social media accounts that evening. No caption, no music, no commentary, no filter. Just the raw file, starting with the approach at the booth, running uninterrupted through the moment the Suburbans arrived. The first 2 hours, 60,000 views. By midnight, 600,000. By morning, 3.8 million. And climbing in the way things climb when they have caught something real. When they have shown something that enough people recognize from their own lives to feel the specific recognition that makes you share a thing. Not because it is interesting, but because you need someone else to know you saw it. By the end of the week, the numbers stopped mattering, because every major outlet had it. The recording the diner footage from Earl's 4-angle security system, the image of papers with Department of Justice letterhead lying in a gravel lot in a small Georgia town, and the words Holt had used. The word dropped flat like a boot. The phrase shows up where you do not belong. The phrase, you people. Those words became headlines and screenshots and cable news segments played on a loop until the loop itself became part of the story. Cassidy Vance, a reporter at WTLM Channel 7 in Macon, did something that morning that the Callaway County Sheriff's Office had never done in 24 years of Warren Holt's career. She made phone calls. She knocked on doors. She drove to addresses and sat in living rooms and listened. And what she found was that the 41-minute recording from Earl's roadside was not the beginning of anything. It was the most recent entry in a file that had been accumulating for over a decade. 5 people came forward in the first week, then 6, then 11. Black and Latino residents of Callaway County, some still living there, some who had left years ago and driven back because they had seen the video and finally thought someone might listen. Every one of them described the same sequence: fabricated pretexts, illegal searches, racial slurs, physical intimidation, and then silence. Leonard Greer was 58 years old and had been driving long-haul routes on E75 for 19 years. A man who knew every truck stop and way station and county road between Atlanta and Tampa the way other men know their own driveways. He had been pulled over by Warren Holt 6 times in 14 months on the same 12-mile stretch of county road. Each time Holt had searched his cab. Each time he found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Each time Leonard had filed a formal complaint with the Callaway County Sheriff's Office. Not once had anything happened, because every complaint filed against Deputy Warren Holt, all 11 of them spanning 11 years, had landed on the same desk, in the same drawer, reviewed by the same hand, and marked with the same 2 letters in the margin, N/A, no action, initialed every time by Sheriff Dale Murphy. The FBI Civil Rights Division in Washington had been moving since Cross's first radio call from the gravel lot. The subpoenas were drafted before the recording reached 1 million views. And 4 days after it went national, Murphy made the mistake of calling a press conference. He stood behind the Callaway County seal and a wooden podium and told the assembled reporters that Deputy Holt was a decorated officer with a distinguished record who had been unfairly targeted by a politically motivated attack on local law enforcement. He called the video one angle of a complex situation. He said the department would conduct its own thorough internal review. When a reporter asked specifically about the 11 buried complaints, Murphy adjusted his hat and said these things have a way of getting exaggerated. The clip of the hat adjustment and the word exaggerated was shared 800,000 times in the first 3 hours, for reasons that had nothing to do with Murphy's intended message. Protest signs appeared outside the Callaway County Sheriff's Office within 48 hours. Civil rights organizations issued statements. 2 Georgia state legislators called publicly for Murphy's resignation. A federal petition gathered 180,000 signatures in 4 days. The Department of Justice did not need the petition. The grand jury had already been convened in Atlanta. Murphy was indicted on 2 counts. Obstruction of justice for the 11 complaints marked no action and filed in a drawer over 11 years, and civil rights violations under a pattern of deliberate indifference, the legal term for a supervisor who knows what is happening in his department and chooses the drawer over the truth. Holt's charges were substantially heavier. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 United States Code Section 242, unlawful search and seizure, false imprisonment, and filing a false police report for the fabricated Callaway County break-ins he had invented that morning in Earl's roadside. Raines pleaded guilty before either trial. 14 months, immediate termination from the department. His cooperation with federal investigators provided corroborating testimony about the pattern of Holt's conduct that the recordings and dispatch logs had already established beyond any reasonable doubt. Holt's trial lasted 7 days in federal court in Atlanta. Marcus's 41-minute recording was played in full, every word, in the courtroom. For the jury, Earl's security footage was projected on a 12-foot screen, 2 angles simultaneously, showing the interior of the diner in the parking lot from above, showing the moment Holt's coffee mug stopped at his mouth when he heard the rumble, and the moment the 6 Suburbans rolled in, and the moment 14 doors opened. The dispatch logs were entered into evidence and certified by the county records office. 0 burglaries reported in Callaway County for the month of August. 0. Not 1 call, not 1 report, not 1 investigation, not 1 arrest. 0. The cross-examination of Holt lasted 4 hours. The prosecution's final question was delivered without preamble, without build-up, without any drama beyond the weight of its own simplicity. Deputy Holt, in 24 years of service in Callaway County, Can you name for this jury one single white motorist you stopped and detained at Earl's roadside based on being unfamiliar to you? Holt sat in the witness box for 9 seconds. The courtroom was completely silent for all 9 of them. No, he said finally, his voice barely carrying to the back row. I cannot. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 50 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The federal judge, a 63-year-old woman who had served on the bench for 31 years, delivered her remarks without raising her voice once. She sentenced Warren Holt to 66 months in federal prison, a lifetime ban from law enforcement in any jurisdiction, and mandatory restitution to Darius and Marcus Whitfield and to every individual whose formal complaint had been buried in Dale Murfreet's drawer. Murfree received 42 months for obstruction. Leonard Greer framed the formal written apology from Callaway County. The county letterhead, the signature, the official acknowledgement that what he had reported was real, and that the failure to act on it had been deliberate. He mounted it on the wall of his cab. Between a photo of his daughter's college graduation and a faded road atlas he had been using since 2004. When people asked him why the letter was there, he said the same thing every time, without variation, without bitterness, in the even voice of a man who has been saying true things for 19 years and has learned to say them simply. 19 years I drove that road. 19 years I told people what that man did to me on the side of it. 19 years nobody with the authority to stop it took the time to believe me. Now they do. And the part that should stay with you, the part I need you to sit with, is that it took 6 federal Suburbans and a man with a title to make the truth count. Because the truth was always the same truth. It was always there. I was always saying it. Earl Briggs hung a laminated copy of the 4th Amendment on the wall of his diner, between the specials board and a photograph of his late wife Ruth Ann, who had run the counter with him for 30 years before she passed. He did not make a speech about it. He did not call the paper. A regular noticed it one morning about 2 weeks after the trial and asked Earl what it was. Earl looked at it for a moment and said, "A reminder. For me," and went back to pouring coffee. The business went up in the months that followed, more than it had in a decade. People drove from 4 counties over just to sit in the window booth where 2 black men had been told they did not belong, and eat a meal, and stay as long as they wanted. Darius Whitfield held one press conference on the courthouse steps in Atlanta. On the day the federal consent decree over the Callaway County Sheriff's Office was announced, the first such decree in the state in over a decade, requiring mandatory body cameras with footage released within 72 hours, an independent civilian review board with subpoena power, a prohibition on quota-based enforcement, and federal audits every 6 months. He stood at the microphone in the same pressed suit that had been pulled from the trunk of the rental car and left in the gravel. And he said, "What happened in Tillman is not a story about one deputy and one morning. It is a story about what a community permits when it makes the decision that looking away is easier than speaking, that silence is neutral. And what I want the people of Callaway County and every county to understand is that silence is never neutral. Silence is a choice. And every choice has consequences." The morning at Earl's roadside was the consequence of 11 years of that choice being made by people who had the authority to make a different one. He declined every interview after that, every follow-up, every book inquiry, every documentary conversation. When asked why, he said, "The case speaks for itself. My job now is to make sure it does not have to keep speaking." And Marcus went back to Atlanta and started a new Friday tradition with his middle schoolers. 15 minutes before basketball practice, sitting on the bleachers, he walked them through the basics. What your rights are in a traffic stop, when you can refuse. How to record. How to stay calm when every nerve in your body is telling you to do something other than stay calm. He told them every Friday the same thing. "I'm not teaching you to fight anyone. I am teaching you to come home." If this story reached something in you, if you felt something in that parking lot or in the diner or in Leonard Greer's 19 years of saying true things that no one in authority was willing to hear, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth has always been there. It just needs enough people willing to say it out loud. Like and subscribe to our channel, and we will keep telling the stories that matter.